Welcome to what I'm most excited for in Vue 3. Did everyone enjoy yesterday? Is everyone awake? Everyone happy? Happy to be here? Happy to have another day full of learning? Yeah! All right. Excellent. So first, a little bit about myself. This is me at my very first VUECONF. As you can see, I'm the only one looking at the wrong camera. Except for Posva, Eduardo here, a little bit to my right, wondering what I'm looking at. Probably says a little bit about me. A lot of people know me for my documentation work. I've written probably most of the core documentation for Vue. Do people like Vue? And I work on that with Sarah Drasner, who you've seen, and also Natalia Tepluhina, that you saw yesterday, who also do incredible docs work, and the hundreds of community members who help us to make the Vue docs great. If you look at the contributors, I think we're in the 300s or 400s now of people who have made contributions to the Vue docs. That's incredible. Hey, round of applause to the community. Now, some of you might be thinking, didn't Evan already talk about Vue 3 yesterday? Like, didn't they coordinate? And he talked about some of the big picture stuff. You know, basically, Vue 3 is going to be harder, better, faster, stronger. And he also talked about some new features that will be introduced in Vue 3. And I'm going to be talking more about your current code. How is code like this, Vue 2 code, going to change? How will the code that you write today simplify and become more explicit as you migrate? And with these two trends, this is the main thing I want you to get out of this talk, that Vue 3 in general will become more simple and more explicit. In terms of simpler, what I mean is less code, especially to perform really common tasks. Fewer concepts. I don't know if I'm the only one who feels this way, but I think developers already have a lot to keep in their heads just to do their jobs. Yes? Other people also feel like that? So we're trying to reduce the number of things that you have to keep in your head so you have more brain space for just like what your app is supposed to do. And also fewer foot guns. For those who aren't familiar with the expression foot gun, what I mean is we want to minimize the number of cases where you can accidentally make a mistake that will cause you pain later. We want the easy thing to be the right thing, to be the thing that will make you happy, make your app more maintainable, and also scale. And also more explicit. By this I mean clear relationships. For example, when data is shared or passed between one component and another component, we want both components to know about that relationship. When looking at that component, that relationship should be clear in both components. That's not always the case, and I'll share some examples of that in Vue 2 right now. And expressive code. That means code that when you look at it, you can tell immediately or almost immediately what it's supposed to do. There's not a lot of noise or boilerplate getting in the way. But before we take the red pill and learn all about the secrets of Vue 3, I want to give a disclaimer. So none of these features are final nor complete. You may see different features, either changed or removed in the final version of Vue 3. A lot of these features are still in active discussion. Some of them still need to go through public RFCs. And as we further develop Vue, we'll find like new problems and new solutions that we have to use to work around those problems. So none of this is final, but this is a sneak peek of the general direction we're going so that you can keep those trends in mind, and you can see how your code will become simpler and more explicit in Vue 3. Now, these are some things you've probably already heard. Evan has mentioned before, and also yesterday, that we're getting rid of the reactivity caveats. But what does that actually mean for our code? Well, currently in Vue 2, we have this view.set and view.delete methods, which allows us to set an item to an array, add a new property to an object, or delete a property to an object. And the reason we need to do this is because the current reactivity system in Vue 2 isn't smart enough to detect these specific kinds of changes. So we use these methods to tell Vue that something has changed. Otherwise, your component won't re-render, your computed property won't recompute. Fortunately, in Vue 3, as long as you don't need to support Internet Explorer, and you can use the version that doesn't support Internet Explorer, you'll be able to just use normal JavaScript in all of these cases. This is one less thing you'll have to keep in your head, and you can just do what you're already used to doing in JavaScript. And the reactivity system will just work. Also, multiple root nodes. This is a small one, but still one of my favorites. It'll affect so many of my applications. How many people have done something like this? Give me a show of hands if you've had one element next to another in a template. Yeah, and then quite a few people, and then what happened? Broke. This is the scariest red I could find that still had good contrast. Basically, it'll tell you, component template should contain exactly one root element. And I think for this particular warning, I might have written this one, or I at least wrote about it in the docs. And I still do this sometimes, just forgetting, because it feels so natural to just add another element. Not forgetting that I'm going to have this problem, and then, I guess I just wrap those two divs in another div, and it feels inelegant. Fortunately, in Vue 3, you'll be able to use multiple root nodes in a template or a render function in any component. It's one less thing you have to worry about, and it also opens up the opportunities for more patterns that previously were unavailable. Now, here's the new stuff. Features that you might not have heard about before, or changes that you might not have heard about before. Or if you have heard about, it's only been in whispers in the hallways of the internet. Simpler, transparent wrappers. Now, if you don't know what a transparent wrapper is, don't worry about it. I'll explain. This is a common pattern in Vue. You might have used it without even knowing the name, where you have, let's say, a base input component. And you want it to work with vModel. You want to be able to add attributes that input elements accept. And you also want to be able to add events, or event listeners, that would work on a normal input element. The idea of a transparent wrapper component is that the base input component should behave exactly like a normal input element, except with superpowers. And here's the code currently in Vue 2 to make this work in the base input component. It's a lot of code, but I'm going to walk you through it. First, to make the placeholder attribute work and any other attributes that we decide to pass, we have to set inherent attrs to false on our component, because otherwise, the default behavior of Vue is that attributes not defined as props will be passed to the root element of the component. In this case, the root element is a label. And what happens when you add a placeholder to a label? Nothing. It doesn't do anything. So we're telling Vue to turn that behavior off and explicitly bind attributes with vBindAdders here to the input element itself, which is not the root element anymore because the root element is a label. We've added a label to this component. So that makes placeholder and any other attributes work. To make this event work, we need something similar. We add VON_listeners to the input. Now, Vue doesn't have any behavior where it'll automatically listen for events on the root element, but it does currently have a feature called .native. Vion's .native modifier will listen for a native event on the label. The problem is, if we had keyup.enter.native, and then the root element of the base input changed from an input to a label, suddenly this component is broken, and it's not obvious. And in fact, you might not even catch it right away unless you have really good tests. Instead, by avoiding the use of the .native modifier, which I currently consider an anti-pattern and will be removed in Vue 3, you'll be able to explicitly define that the parent might care about which element listeners are added to. And finally, to get vModel to work, I have to specify a model option saying that we want to use the event update instead of the default event for vModel, which is input. Now, there's a problem with the input event. It's also a native event for elements. But we don't want to override that behavior. Like we said, we want the base input to act exactly like a normal input element. And so instead, we use this update event, and we emit update instead of emitting input with the value that the input has been changed to. And then vBindAdders adds the value attribute to this input. So that's quite a bit of work just to get this working. And as you can see, the amount of code related to the feature that we've added, basically the ability to add a label, props label here, and then this label element, is obscured by all this boilerplate code to just say this component should work like a normal input. Fortunately, in Vue 3, drum roll please, either stamp your feet or on your lap. A little louder, a little louder. This is how it'll be simplified. As you can see, like what this component actually does, add a label, is front and center. That's the vast majority of the component. The tiny, tiny bit that makes it work just like a normal input element is this, vBindAdders. So that makes vModel work, that makes the placeholder and any other attributes work, that makes the keyUp listener and any other listeners just work. Now, you're probably wondering, how? Why, how is this possible? First, there will very likely be no more attribute inheritance in Vue 3. So components will no longer automatically pass attributes not defined as props to the root element of that component. Instead, you'll have to be explicit with vBindAdders. It's a little extra work for some components, but it makes everything more explicit and keeps you from creating bugs where you change the root element of a component without realizing that that might cause a problem. And for a reminder, for people not familiar with attrs includes all attributes that are not defined as props on the component. Which also means we don't need inherit attrs false, because it will never be true. Simpler API, less to learn when you're learning Vue. VON will also compile to attributes. In this case, VON keyUp compiles to on-keyUp attribute. Keep in mind, this is different from the on keyUp without a hyphen, which only allows you to add a single listener for this event to the element. Instead, this is still special syntax from Vue that will interpret to add event listeners to your component or element. So once again, to make this work, we just add vbind attrs, and attrs will include all non-emitted listeners. When I say non-emitted listeners, I mean there are some cases where we might want listeners on a component not to be passed through to an element. So in Vue 3, we'll likely have a new option similar to props, like emits, to declare the events that this component is in charge of emitting. Which means no more listeners, and no more .native modifier for VON. Fewer concepts that you have to learn. You're allowed to clap. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. vModel, and you might be starting to recognize a pattern here, will also compile to attributes. In this case, we're thinking a model value and on-model update attribute. Which means, once again, you can just add vbind attrs to make vModel work. So there's no more overriding the native input event. And probably no more model option, because we won't have to worry about conflicts with existing attributes and events for different elements. Now, related to this, vModel is also getting a little smarter on components. How many people use vModel and love it? Give me a shout out. Woo! Woo, woo. Cool. So the reason vModel is magical is because it just works. And the way that it just works is through some code like this, which you don't really need to worry about. This is just one piece of the code that makes vModel work in the current Vue 2 code base. And as you can see, we're importing a few helpers. Is IE9, is IE, and is Edge. What do you think we're using those for? Yeah, maybe to work around some weird cross-browser behavior that otherwise, if you didn't use vModel, you'd have to know about and work around yourself manually. Like React and Angular have similar tools to help you get around weird cross-browser event stuff on forms. React having the onChange, their special onChange event. And by the way, Internet Explorer and Edge, before you start piling on Microsoft, aren't the only browsers that we have to work around things for. It's just in this file. We have helpers like that to help us detect pretty much any browser, because there are quirks everywhere, and also iOS and Android. So currently, vModel on an element, and I'm using a select here to be a little bit different, and also because selects are a little bit less straightforward than inputs. We add vModel, selected choice, and this component will just work like we expect it to. What happens when we decide, like, you know what, I want to take this code and reuse it by refactoring it into a component. For example, a base select, where we still want VModel to work, and we'll just pass the choices array to it as a prop. So how will that look in Vue 2? Our select just got a little bit more complicated. So first we have to know about this change event. That's the event that select uses to know when a change has happened. And we have to emit an input event, assuming we're not overriding the default VModel event, with the new value when a new value is selected. And then we also have to tell this default disabled option when it's selected, and we have to tell it to be selected when choices do not include the value that is currently passed to the select. And the first time I wrote this code, when I was trying to demo out what VModel was doing, I actually made a mistake. Instead of choices includes value, I had something like, I looked to see if value was blank. Like value was was null or something like that, or if it was falsy. And the problem with that is you could have something that isn't selected, and then what'll happen is it'll just select the first option in some browsers, or maybe select some other option that is closer to it. I was getting some weird behavior that was different across browsers. So you have to know that this is essentially what VModel is doing for you. And then for our actual options, we have to tell it when that is selected as well. And we have to know about, once again, about the selected attribute. You have to know more about all the form elements in HTML. We selected when the choice for this option is equal to the current value. Now that's a bit annoying, but what about in Vue 3? We want to take this select and refactor it to a base select component. And again, this is really common. I find myself doing these things all the time. How many people have taken some kind of chunk of code and refactored it to a component before? Hopefully a lot of people, right? It's something we do all the time. It's just part of using Vue. So I'd love another drum roll, please. And a build up and a build up, and then we're going to wind down. Beautiful. I feel so powerful in this moment. That's it. For those who didn't catch it, in order to refactor this to a component, this is what we did. Just v-bind adders. And not only, just like we saw with the input, not only do attributes work and events work and VModel works, but we also get VModel's magic. The model value and on-model update events are the attributes that actually create the magic. And in Vue 2, we weren't able to do that because VModel was only aware of what it was added to. It was added to a component. By compiling to attributes and having the attributes pass through the component, they'll be able to see that they're added to a select and add the specific magic they need to add for the select. Which means you get this incredible, awesome behavior without having to worry about losing or having to reinvent anything. We'll still take care of these cross-browser quirks that you should never have to worry about. Now, the next thing that I'm really excited about is simpler render functions. So give me a shout out if you've used render functions before in Vue. A shout out. Okay. Now give me a groan if you found them kind of annoying. Okay, I'm hearing about as many groans as shout-outs. So, fortunately, templates are a pretty nice experience. They work just like HTML. You have an element, and you pass it attributes, and the attributes do stuff. It's pretty simple. In JSX, it's a similar story. We have this base input, vModel class. This is almost identical to the template version. So again, this is pretty nice. When JSX gets a little bit more complicated, it might not be as nice. But at least for simple examples and in isolated components, it's very easy to read and see what's going on. But what happens when we don't use JSX? Oof. So you'll notice this already feels complex. How many people's eyes, when this came up, just started kind of blurring a little bit? This happens to me all the time too. And I wrote the documentation on how this syntax works. And I still refer to it pretty often. I've probably referred to it 100 times because I keep forgetting how to structure this middle object with other nested objects, with props, and I guess we have to know which things are props. And we have to use on for vOn, I guess. And then we have a class here, but the class doesn't go in attrs. Placeholder goes in attrs, and the reason class doesn't go is because it actually has special behavior that we add to it to allow you to do nicer, more clever class bindings. So it's kind of a pain. Fortunately, in Vue 3, this is getting simpler. As you can see, this is now a flat object. The only thing that you have to know about still is that vModel compiles to model value and onModel update. But this also gives you the magic behavior of vModel that you wanted, unlike the previous example. And that's it. It's going to be so much easier to refactor to a render function when you need to, so much less intimidating, and a lot easier to learn about them. So if you still haven't learned about render functions, it will be better in Vue 3, I promise. So these are the trends, simpler and more explicit. I hope you can see that your code will be simplifying. It won't be radically changing. This isn't a completely new kind of Vue. But when moving to Vue 3, a few things you might be wondering. If you're not already using Vue, should I wait for Vue 3? Some of you might be thinking gosh, I haven't used Vue before. I just came to see if, how it was and what the community was like, and then report back to my team to see whether we wanted to use Vue. Sounds like Vue 2 stinks. He's telling me there are a bunch of things that are hard and difficult. So Vue 2 still has, and I don't think people in other frameworks deny this, the easiest learning curve out of all the frameworks. I've never heard someone try to deny that. We try to make it very simple for you to get started with Vue, or at least as simple as we can. So you don't have to wait. You can jump on Vue 2 right now. Will Vue 3 support Internet Explorer? Evan has touched on this, but I want to reiterate. Yes, but if you use the version of Vue 3 that is compatible with Internet Explorer, you will have to deal with the same reactivity caveats as in Vue 2. Will Vue 3 break everything? Yes. I'm just kidding. No. I wish I could see Evan in the front row or something so I could see his shocked face. He's Chris, what are you doing? This is not the message. So for Vue 1 to Vue 2, I wrote a thorough migration guide. How many people have been using Vue since Vue 1? Shout out. Did you use the migration guide? Shout out. Did you love the migration guide? Shout out. What? I worked hard on that. No, but most people I talk to do really love the migration guide. We walk through every single breaking change, why we made it, and how your code will change. And I also built a next-generation migration helper. Oh, sorry, this is the wrong image. A next-generation migration helper. It's a CLI tool that scans your code base, whether it's an application, a library, or even a blog post, and tells you about the things that need to change in order to get you ready for the next version of Vue. And what I heard is that for people who have large applications that might have taken a week or two to migrate, instead, using the migration helper and the migration guide, it took them about 5 hours, which is a huge improvement. Now in Vue 3, we're not really happy about that. We think we can do better. So we're going to try to minimize that to about 5 minutes for a large application by not only telling you about the things that will need to change, but wherever we can guess user intent, we want to offer to automatically make that change for you. So this way, when your boss asks you to upgrade to Vue 3, you can tell him it'll take about a week. And then you can take the week off. No, but really, I don't recommend lying to your boss. But technically, there would be enough code changes for them to say, like, wow, you've really done a lot of work. I'm surprised you got all this done in a week. But this will get you back to working on the things that you care about in your application, rather than dealing with, trying to keep all these moving parts together that might break. But what if you're still stuck with Vue 2? Let's say you're using some kind of vendor library that still hasn't upgraded to be compatible with Vue 3, and you're stuck with it for now. Don't worry. We're backporting as many features as possible, and this has started even before Vue 3 is released. So for example, the new vslot syntax that Evan talked about, that's something that came out of discussions for Vue 3, and we realized while developing it, like, this doesn't have to be exclusive to Vue 3. We could bring this back to Vue 2 without breaking changes. And so we did. So already, you're starting to get some sprinkles of Vue 3 goodness in Vue 2, whether you realize it or not. Now, how can you take part? How can you help us make Vue 3 better? Head to github.com/Vue.js/RFCs. Again, Evan has talked about that a lot, but really, this is the best place to discuss new features with us, to propose new features. Please help us make Vue 3 better. It definitely helped for the slot syntax. And that's all the content I have. Now, a few really quick things. Like, if you enjoy me saving you like a week or two of time, and you want to support me on my Patreon so I have more time to make your job easier, and to allow you to lie to your boss, even though I don't condone it, you can support me at patreon.com/ChrisVueFritz. I would love your support so I can spend more time making your lives easier, working on documentation and tooling to improve your developer experience. And a big shout out to my Vuesionaries, John Leiter from Vuetify and Rolf Haug from Vue School. Vuetify, for people who aren't familiar, is probably the most popular component library in the Vue ecosystem. A lot of people really, really love it. So check it out if you're interested in something like that. And Vue School, which, as Greg mentioned yesterday, is a great resource for learning about Vue through high-quality video content. And they have a lot of free resources, too. So you can check it out, see if you like it, and then you can pay for some of the more advanced stuff if you're curious about those topics. You can find these slides at github.com/ChrisVueFritz/Vue3Trends in about like 10 minutes after I push it up. You can find me at ChrisVueFritz on Twitter, GitHub, and pretty much everywhere else. And thank you all for your kind attention.